if you clicked on this video, then you probably already know what self-sabotage is. But if you are somebody that's having an identity crisis and you don't know what it is or you're trying to prevent it, well, essentially it's that you're doing things that are blocking you from success towards the goals that you say you have. But the tricky thing about self-sabotage is it's one of those things that you don't really know you're doing it until after the fact, right? And a lot of this comes, what I've found, at least for me in my own life, when you're entering or you're in periods of life when everything's kind of up in the air and you don't know who you want to be, really. Like, you have directions, but you don't know who you need to be in order to get to wherever it is you're trying to go. And I found the time in my life, which wasn't that like far back, it was actually pretty recently, where I was the worst at it, was definitely post graduating college. Played baseball in college. I was an athlete my entire life, and then all of a sudden, athletics are done. I just didn't have the stuff to go pro in anything, and now you got to figure out what you're going to do with your life when for the past 23 years all you have ever known is sports. And other people might have something similar. They might have been super involved in their school, or like as far as extracurricular activities or debate or whatever it might be. And it can be hard. It can be hard to deal with because you have this like idea in your head of who it is that you're trying to be, but you don't exactly know what you need to do to realize it. And whenever you do think you need to know, you do think you know what you need to do, you do those things, but then somehow you always end up doing something else that brings you one step backwards, right? And because of this uncertainty, everything seems like it's kind of just chaos. And there's this term in like physics and stuff, it's basically called entropy, which basically states that any system or something that is not like maintained tends to fall into chaos unless there is intentional inputs or things that are making sure that that system is staying on track. And for me, a lot of the times whenever I would do things and then end up going in the opposite direction was whenever I didn't have any intention doing anything. Like, I knew where I wanted to go, but I wasn't like intentional about the direction that I was saying I wanted to go. So I remember like the thing that sticks out to me is like whenever I was dating post college, right? Like I had a goal. I wanted to, get in a quality relationship with a quality woman. And this was even happening during college. And I remember, I would say I would want these things. Like, I would want a good relationship. Yet I would always find myself doing some sort of like douchey behavior, right? Like, I would end up, talking to other girls, cheating, doing like things like that that I didn't, like, in my mind I didn't want to do, but I was still acting out on it. And I think a lot of that happens from having this identity crisis. Like, you don't know who you are. And so because you don't know who you are, you don't know where to put your energy or your intention into the things that you're trying to do. And because of that, you end up just taking steps backward. Because the system that you're trying to develop for dating or fitness or whatever, it's not like you don't have this like solid direction, solid set of actions that you need to take, because everything is just kind of up in the air in limbo, because a lot of the actions that we take are based on the identity and the thing that we see ourselves as. And whenever we don't see ourselves as anything, we're not going to do the things that are necessary to actually get to the goal that we verbally say we want. Now, one of the biggest problems is we're constantly being just bombarded with information every day about who we should try to be or who we should not try to be. And like this goes like on both sides. Like I fell into the trap for a long time of like, oh, entrepreneur, fucking 9 to 5. Like I don't want to do that. And I ended up not getting a 9 to 5 job out of college for like 2 years just because I had this like spiteful attitude towards it. And it ended up just setting me even further backwards because I was working for $9 an hour, working 60 hours a week, still making nothing. And I had to break that belief by just jumping in and getting a 9 to 5. And then I realized like, oh, this is actually better than working 2 jobs for 60 hours a week. And that's only because I was just listening without even actually critically thinking about what these other people were telling me. And after, going through that whole experience and, coming out the other side, and now I'm like, okay, like I still don't love the 9 to 5. I would love to find a way out of it at some point, but it's not as bad as what it says it is because I've been able to frame it in a way where like, dude, I'm being paid to learn things. I'm being paid to become more valuable in the workplace at least, because at the end of the day, even if entrepreneurship or whatever does not work out for me, I'm still going to make a lot of money because I'm going to, like, I have that intention behind, like, either way, whatever I'm doing, I'm just going to do it the best I can. And I was able to get to that place internally whenever I started basically asking myself 4 questions. And these 4 questions are not typical, like, well, what are your values? What do you want to do with your life? Like, what do you take pride in? What do you dislike? These are a little bit like contrarian to those, but it's still to set you off in the right direction, because a lot of the time when we're having these identity crises and we're asking questions like, who do I want to be, when in reality we could be whatever. Like there's so many options, so we get paralyzed by the amount of things that are out there. And so these questions are kind of meant to be a little bit focused less on who you're trying to be and more so on the opposite side of who are you not wanting to be, which the first question is, who do you not want to be? So we tend to bias ourselves towards positive outcomes. And because we always ask, who do we want to be, we just get left with, oh my God, there are so many different options for so many different things that we can do. And I think a better question to ask yourself is, who do you not want to be? Because you can narrow down pretty quickly who you don't want to be. And by asking that question, you at least know what direction to not go. And a lot of times, from what I've started to pick up in life, is that when you start sabotaging yourself and you start getting, you have setbacks, that usually comes from things that you do. It doesn't ever really happen from things that you don't do. Because usually we try to add so many things in, and that's when the chaos starts. When in reality, we need to be taking things away. Like if you look at like any of the best investors on the planet, it's more about what they didn't choose to get into. Or if you listen to a lot of big business people or entrepreneurs, they'll talk about like they say no to a lot of really good opportunities even, because they know that the things that they are going to do, they're going to be very selective about it. And they usually get really, really, really good at one thing. Same thing with like the whole like, you need to have 7 income streams to be a millionaire or billionaire or whatever. The truth is, most of the people that make their money, they make their money with one thing and then they diversify later. And I think that's the same way, like if you approach your identity as like, hey, if I can just move away from being who I don't want to be, it's going to set you up to, even if you're not exactly the person you want to be, you're at least not going to continue to set yourself like, 10 steps back. And something else is like we tend to run towards pleasure and run away from pain. And this is, there's a cognitive bias that, you can just Google self-serving bias, but basically like we want to do things that are enjoyable, right? We want to do things that are pleasurable, but a more powerful thing to do is running away from pain. Because if you think about it, the reason we fall back into bad habits is because we are running away from the pain of boredom or the pain of not doing something. Because doing the thing, like if you struggle to go work out, it's more painful to go work out than like you would rather run away from doing that than like running away from the pain of like not being fit or being overweight still. So I think it could be valuable to run away from the things that are going to cause you pain. So who do you not want to be, and keep that as the focus rather than like the end goal. The second question the second question that helped paint a better picture for me as far as being able to separate myself from like everything else outside of me was, what is something that everybody does that I could live without? So there was a period of probably about a year where I just decided not to drink alcohol. And I wanted to see, like, can I actually live without this thing that everybody else does and that everybody else says they can do, or that says that they can't live without? And what I found was, one, I could live without alcohol, and I could do it pretty easily after the first couple times. Like, you have the peer pressure and stuff, but eventually, like, it kind of, you get weaned off of it. Everybody gets used to you not drinking, and then it ends up being a lot easier to deal with. But that's like the first step at kind of identifying, like, yo, okay, this is a part of me that I did. It didn't hurt too bad. Like, it was a little uncomfortable at first, but I figured it out. I feel better every day. I sleep better. My weight's going down. And just because everybody else is doing something, that doesn't mean that we should also do it. So there's this concept called diffusion of responsibility, where, we grew up in tribes, and so it was super important for us to be considered part of the group. And at one time, not in modern times, but even just 400 years back, it was really important to stay as part of a group, because if you were ostracized, if you were kicked out, then you had way less of a chance of survival. But we don't have those same problems today. But what this diffusion of responsibility is let's say, like, imagine that somebody is out on the street, and there's a bunch of people walking by, and somebody's yelling like, oh, like, help, help, like they're crying out. Most people, and you can probably check yourself on this, will look around first to see what other people and how they're reacting, and then they will base their decision off of whether they should help or not based on what other people are doing. So you will decide that whether it's an emergency or not based on how other people react, not based on your own intuition of maybe I should help this person. And this is another thing that, can kind of, having this idea of like, how can I start to separate from other people? Because just because everybody else is doing it, that doesn't mean that person's not in trouble. So a lot of times you have to really think, and like, am I doing this because I want to, or am I doing it because everybody else is doing it and I'm just trying to fit in? Because we don't have the same problems, now that we did, hundreds of years ago. Like, we don't have to worry about that. We have a lot of our, basic needs taken care of at this point. And another thing to go with this is Shane Parrish just wrote a book called Clear Thinking. And in it, he talks about, rather than trying to be disciplined or, or build your willpower, set rules for yourself. Because when you think of it like discipline, every single time you go out, or like, let's just use alcohol as an example, every single time you go out to try and not drink, you have to make the conscious decision every time not to order a drink. And that's way harder than if you just set a rule for yourself, being, I only drink on Fridays, or I only drink one drink and then I'm done, or I don't drink at all. That takes the decision aspect out of it because it's a rule now. It's part of you, and part of creating your own identity and not sending you, steps behind of where you currently are from where you're trying to go, is having rules and having standards. And so creating rules around the things that you are trying to do, like, are you the type of person that works out 5 times a week? Are you the type of like, I work out every single day, or I work out on these days at the same times every single week? It's a lot easier than to every single time trying to decide, okay, am I going to go work out today? What am I going to work out? Blah, blah, blah. And this is why planning or goals is so effective, because it takes the decision making out of it. Because as your day goes on, the amount of willpower you have to make decisions goes down. It's known as decision fatigue. And setting rules is an easy way to take more decisions off of your plate, because, most of the time, the better thing to do is take things away rather than add things on. So the third question is, what seems like something cool that you want to do that does not involve status or money? Most of the things that we try to do or that we say we want to do with our life, it revolve around either money or having more status. And those are two basic drivers. Those are the things that push you up the social hierarchy, that give you more opportunities, more resources, dating, whatever. And by looking for things that don't revolve around that, you can actually get more in tune with the things that you do want. So one thing that I like doing, that is enjoyable for me, is drawing. I am not good. I'm decent because I've done it enough now at this point, but it's something that allows me to escape everything else and actually just enjoy something for what it is, which is creating an image on a flat piece of paper and maybe making it look 3D. That's my thing. Your thing, it could be action sports, it could be hiking, whatever it is, but those things are so important because part of developing your own identity to where you stop sabotaging yourself and you stop doing things that set you back is being clear on things that you are as well. And the things that are you and that create what makes you special are a lot of times things that aren't revolving around money or status. That's why, like, a lot of people that do end up getting the money and the status they want, they get there by, doing weird things that don't seem like that they would ever make money, but they do. And the more things that you can focus on that don't revolve around those, the better sense of self you're going to have, because it's clear on what you feel in your soul. Not only that, I remember there was one time I actually had this little hobby where I just liked distressing like jean jackets and jeans. Like, no reason. I wore some of my own stuff, but like it was something that like I like using my hands a lot. I like making stuff with my hands because it makes me feel like I'm actually connecting to something and doing something, and it allows you to take your mind off of other things. Which, if you read the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he talks about flow. And flow is basically the state where time disappears and it's like peak happiness, peak enjoyment of everything else. And the main thing about happiness in his book and the argument that he makes is how often you can get into this state of doing something for the sake of doing it and being completely immersed without worrying about everything else outside of you. That is what's going to give you that sense of fulfillment and that sense of purpose, which in turn is going to give you the ability to develop more intention behind the things that you do to drive you towards the goals you have. And you're going to stop self-sabotaging because you're not going to be so worried about everything else going on outside of you. And you're not going to hate yourself because you have something that actually gives you life and makes you feel like you're creating something, you're contributing. And the fourth question is, how can I be the best something for somebody else? Most of the time, when we are having these identity crises and we're doing things that set us 10 steps back, it's because we are too focused on ourselves. And when you can find ways, whether that's being the best friend to somebody else, whether that's being the best, account manager at your company, or being the best salesperson, being the best client to somebody that you work with, you can take your focus away on you and start putting it on somebody else, which is what drives attention to actually doing meaningful things. Because at the end of the day, I think in my opinion, where a lot of identity crises happen is when we have no clue what value we bring to the world. And if you can find a way to be the best something for somebody else and take the spotlight off of you, turn it to somebody else, you're going to give your mind a sense of freedom that it's never felt before, or at least it rarely feels, and it's going to continue to crave that. Granted, you are still playing off of like those social biases. Like, we want to feel valued, but the best way to feel valued is to actually be valuable to somebody else, because there's the law of reciprocity. People want to give back to those that give them something. And if you can give yourself in full to somebody else without expecting anything in return, you are going to slowly start to develop your identity as a person who is valuable. And when you can develop that identity as somebody that's valuable, you can take your mind off of your own self-serving biases that you have and start to put it towards something that means a lot to you. Because at the end of the day, I think everybody is just looking for meaning in life. And if they could just find that thing that gives them that sense of meaning, they'll be able to push through any obstacle that they do have, and they will stop putting their attention on things that really don't matter. But the attention on the things that don't matter is what drives you backwards. So this actually keeps you focused on the things that do matter, and it's going to set you up to where you no longer have to worry about who you're trying to be anymore, because you are just you. You are the best whatever it is to another person. And on top of that, we have this thing in our brains where we have to be solving problems, right? Anxiety comes from knowing there's problems but not doing anything about it, and there's too many options of things to do. But if you notice it, have you ever noticed how if you just let's say that you need to unload the dishwasher and the dishwasher hasn't been unloaded in 2 days, and it's stressing you out because that's just another thing on your to-do list, but you do it and you solve the problem, how much better you feel? That's another key. You take into account how good you feel when you do something that you didn't want to do. Notice that feeling and ingrain it. Actually take it in. Because when you take those things in, you actually plant it into your brain more than if you just kind of nonchalantly assume that or nonchalantly sit there and you're yep, I just did the thing. Be proud of it. Because what you're doing is you're training your brain to be proud of the things that you're training your brain to be proud of doing what you didn't want to do, but you did it anyway because it needed to be done. And because we're wired to solve problems that way, you're going to once again take your mind off of all the other problems you have, and you're just going to focus on solving problems. And when we solve problems, we build meaning. And that is how we develop our identity. So I hope that you found some form of value out of this. I'd love to answer questions. So if somebody does happen to watch this and they had questions about something, or they have other questions about other things, I would love to answer it. That's the best way I know how to actually, create videos and stuff is by answering questions, because I get like I overanalyze everything, right? I overanalyze everything to a fault to where it ends up coming out terribly. So please ask questions if you have any, but I hope these 4 questions helped you out. And before we go, I'll just reiterate them. 4 questions. Who do you not want to be? What is one small thing that everybody else does that I could live without? What is something that seems cool that doesn't involve money or status? How can I be the best something for somebody else? Hopefully, these questions can take the focus off of you and put more of the focus on outside of you and how you can, develop yourself and find your identity in ways that maybe you haven't thought about before. Because a lot of times the answers that we're looking for are in places that we haven't looked before. So I hope this helps. Till next time, thanks.